We all know examples of immensely talented people who seem like they're on the verge of greatness before squandering it all through self-sabotage. Perhaps you're thinking of someone right now from your personal life, or maybe the world around you. There are countless examples of this in sports, which is where our next story takes us. In the early 2000s, Lightning Lee Murray was an MMA fighter. Though he only had one UFC fight under his belt, some believe that with a blinding combination of speed and power, and with good looks to boot, the English-born Murray had a chance of becoming a superstar. But that all ended abruptly when he was caught on the lam after pulling off the largest cash heist in British history. Thus is the focus of our next guest, two-time Emmy-winning documentary filmmaker Pat Kondelis, who has a new 4-part Showtime series called Catching Lightning. In this series, you'll hear Murray's story from a number of people who go on the record for the very first time, including friends, colleagues, his wife, daughter, and even Lightning Lee himself. The first episode is available now on Showtime streaming platforms and makes its on-air debut on Showtime on Sunday, April 9th at 7 p.m. Central. Pat, thank you so much for the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Trey. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. I think I had the pleasure to speak with you about your two previous films, both Outcry and then also Disgraced. And I'll admit, this one was a little bit less personal for me to get to watch the first couple of this 4-part series. But I'm as blown away by the first 2 episodes as I was your previous works. What initially clued you in to the story of Lee Murray, and why did you want to put your efforts into telling this story?
Well, I'm glad you're liking the first 2 eps so far. This story for me, I mean, I didn't hear about it when it happened. I didn't know anything about it. I'd heard the name Lee Murray. I really didn't put that together with the Securitas heist that happened in England in 2006. I came across an article, I can't even remember which one it was, and started reading, and then just kept reading, digging through everything I possibly could, and was just constantly asking myself, why haven't I heard more about the story? This is the largest cash robbery in world's history, and everything about it is spectacular. It's something out of a Hollywood movie. This stuff doesn't happen in real life. So the fact that this actually did happen and that I knew very, very little about it was what really initially intrigued me to dive deeper.
Yeah, it really does play like a Guy Ritchie film, but it's real life.
Yeah.
So for people like you and like me who before setting this up a couple of days ago didn't know a whole lot about him, who exactly is Lee Murray?
Lee Murray is, well, first of all, he's by far the most fascinating character I've ever come across, by far, hands down. He was a guy in England who was a celebrity in London and was a very notorious gangster, legit gangster. Not like the MMA guys fighting now that pretend or have personas that they're gangster. He was the real deal, and was kind of legendary in the street fights that he would get into. But what made him really interesting is that he wanted to be a UFC fighter. So he was involved in mixed martial arts. He was training with some of the greats, Pat Miletich. The camp that he had with Pat Miletich at the time was unbelievable. I mean, if you follow MMA, it's a who's who of the kind of beginning of MMA in the 2000s with Matt Hughes and Tony Fricklin and Tim Sylvia and, Robbie Lawler, all of these guys that he's training with. So Lee, unfortunately, never really becomes a big MMA star for many reasons that we get into in the doc. But there was other things that he was doing in the criminal world that, probably prevented him from becoming the champion that he really wanted to be. And, he pulls off this largest cash robbery in world history in this unbelievable fashion, using prosthetics and kidnapping people and months of surveillance. So he's a very, very, very unique individual.
And among the people that you spoke with, it included his wife, Nicola, who had never gone on the record in talking about Lee and the crime that he committed, and also the long sentence that he is currently serving. How much of an effort did it take from you to get her to go on the record like this?
A lot of effort. It took a very, very long time. because like you said, Nicola had never talked before. His daughter is in the documentary. She's never talked before publicly. They're friends that are all in the doc on camera. This is the first time they've ever spoken publicly about this. And then the big reveal that we can say now is that you're actually going to get a chance to hear from Lee Murray himself through these recordings that his friend Art and his wife Nicola did over years of him being in prison. So look, there's a reason why this hasn't been done before and the story hasn't been told, like I was saying previously, and it's because none of these people have participated before. So I think, it took me a very long time to try to get my point across to them and talk with them. And then, they agreed, which was very lucky on my part, because it would be a very different story, obviously, without him. But that was one of the things that we wanted to do. There has been things done before. They're all kind of like ABC 2020, Dateline, NBC type things. But, you hear about the legend of Lee Murray. We wanted to try to get beyond that, right? Who is this guy as a three-dimensional person? Who is he really? The only way you can do that is by firsthand accounts of people that really knew him well. So once they all agreed, it completely changed the documentary. And then we found out that, there was actually recordings of Lee. So it was it's wild that we have this. Nobody's heard his voice in 17 years. So it'll be the first time. And the police have never talked to him, right? So the police are going to hear things in this that they didn't previously know.
Wait, okay, so I'm only 2 episodes in, so I obviously don't know how he ends up getting caught, but the police never talk to the guy?
No. I mean, he goes on the run and it becomes a global kind of manhunt story.
Huh.
And yeah, not to give too much away, but yeah, nobody got a chance to talk to him. And when all of this kind of went bad for him, he pled not guilty. So this is the first time that you're going to hear Lee Murray not only talk about what he did, he's going to describe it in great detail and get into kind of the how and why, which has never happened before.
Obviously, you get the okay from the wife and friend to have recorded these conversations over the years to use them as part of this documentary. Did you get Lee's okay also? And were there any efforts to made to try and speak with him on the record, either on camera or just via audio?
Yeah, I definitely tried, but there was no way. He's in a maximum security prison right now, and there's no way to get a hold of him.
So even if he had wanted to, it wasn't possible.
Yeah, his wife, exactly. His wife can talk to him. There's, I think, like 6 people that he's allowed to speak to, right? So his wife and his friend Pard made these recordings over, I think, like a 7-year span between like 2010 and 2017, right? So he's been moved, I think in 2017, 2018, got moved to this maximum security prison where he's in solitary confinement and there's no way to get a hold of him. So I've never interviewed him, never spoken to him. His wife can talk to him about what's happening. So I'm sure he's aware of all of this. But yeah, it's unfortunate that, I'm not able to speak to him, but it's why it's so incredibly important to actually have his voice in this thing.
You really begin to present these recordings in episode 2, and you preface them by saying all of these were taken prior to this documentary being created. So if you had an opportunity to speak with Lee, what is maybe the most important question that you would want to ask him?
Why did you do it? Because he didn't need money. He didn't need money. He was an unbelievably talented guy. To do this, it's such a no turning back moment to do this. And it's not like a split decision that you make and we're just say, hey, we're going to go do this right now today. This was months and months of planning, of very meticulous planning, right? The robbery itself was flawless. Everything that happened after was pretty poorly done, which we get into in the documentary. But itself, I mean, to hold 14 people hostage, right? To kidnap people, wear prosthetics, get these uniforms, do all of the crazy things that they did, and to get away with 92.2 million in cash, fill up a 7.5-ton truck with cash without ever firing a gun is insane, completely insane. So the fact that he said yes, whenever he said yes to doing this, and then spent those months of planning. I would love to know why. And at any point did he say, hey, I really don't know if I want to do this,
Do you have a good hypothesis as to why?
My opinion is he liked the action, right? Anything like this that was a thrill or something that's really wild to do. I think he wanted to say, hey, can I pull it off? That's a hell of a risky thing to do. A hell of a risky thing to do with a family, you know, with kids. So yeah, it's at a certain point in his life, there was a fork in the road, where it's like if one thing would have gone a different way, I don't think any of this stuff happens. So in a lot of ways, his story is kind of it's a tragedy, you know, a guy that's that talented and that was liked by that many people. Um, it's kind of terrible how this all ended up.
Yeah, indeed it is. Now, Lee, whose dream was to make it to the UFC, did have one fight in the UFC. He
Yeah,
fought Jorge Rivera in 2004 and won pretty handily. Ends up getting
yeah,
interviewed by Joe Rogan in the ring
yeah.
after the fact. And there is a sub story involving Tito Ortiz, and you get into what I'm guessing is a legendary story in UFC circles involving Tito Ortiz, Lee Murray, and a street brawl that happened after the UFC came to England for the very first time. Did you have any idea about this story when you started putting the documentary together, and just how incredible was it to hear from all these different guys about this wild street brawl that may or may not have left Tito Ortiz getting knocked out by Lee?
Yeah, I definitely heard the story. And and it's one of those reasons why Lee is like the legend that he is. This story in particular really kind of built up his mythology. But yeah, I mean, they're UFC, I can't even remember which UFC it is. First one in England, and they go to this club China White, and this has become a legendary story. So the fact that we could get Tony Fricklin, obviously, who's there, Pat Miletich, who's there, Chuck Liddell, who's there, and then Lee's trainer, Terry, who's there to all talk about this and take you step by step, it becomes incredible. And then we got access to actually film at China White Club where all of this happened and then the alley. So it was so much fun. It was so much fun to talk to all of those guys. The fighters could not have been nicer. And these are guys that I've followed their careers, watched all their fights. It was really amazing. And we were doing this during COVID, right? So everybody was incredibly generous with their time, letting us in their houses to talk about this stuff that happened. But it was a blast. I keep saying this, but this is the most challenging project I've ever done, but the most fun I've ever had working on a project.
Dude, your ability to recreate scenes both big and small when stories are being retold is uncanny. Where did you
Well,
get that
thank you.
talent from?
Well, I surround myself with people that are far more talented than myself, like my DP and my production designer, my light gaffers, all of it, everybody, the actors, the stunt coordinators, everything that we did. I mean, it's like we shoot a feature film within a documentary essentially, but it's tough to do. It's a fine line with recreations to go from it being very dramatic and setting a tone and putting you as an audience member in the room as these things are happening, which are hopefully going to, increase your engagement in the story. But if you show a face the wrong way, any little thing can snap the audience out of the actual story and say, well, that guy doesn't look like the real guy. So it becomes very, very tricky and complicated. But I work with some fantastic people, and without them, there's no way any of that stuff ends up looking good.
Did you submit an interview request for Tito Ortiz?
I did. I did. Yeah. I spoke with his manager. Well, emailed each other back and forth, and yeah, no interview, unfortunately.
But he
I
did.
would have loved to, but I would assume. I think I know what he would say.
Yeah, and he had gone on the record. He had been asked about this
Yeah.
previously, and you show this footage. I'm assuming that the answer hasn't changed a whole lot over the years.
I feel the same way.
If Lee Murray and Tito Ortiz had fought back then, during what would have been the start of Lee's prime, and I guess squarely in the middle of Tito's prime, who do you think you would have won that fight in the octagon?
That's a great question. I asked the guys too, and Chuck had said, look, if he goes to the ground, like Tito's the guy, right? He's a very good wrestler if he gets him down. he felt like Tito would win. But if it's standing up, it's Lee all the way. So the reports that we got were that the UFC was going to make that into a massive fight. They were setting that up. And I mean, if you see in that Jorge Rivera fight, when Rogan is interviewing Lee, you can even hear it in the doc. Lee says, "I'll fight anybody, anywhere. Like if Tito wants to fight me, let's fight. I'll give up weight," is what he says. Because Tito's a 205. Tito's huge. He's 6'3". The guy's probably walking around at 235. Lee Murray never had to cut weight to make 185. He was 185. So he's fighting a guy that's almost 50 pounds heavier than him, and apparently knocks him out cold in a street fight. But to say I'll fight you in the UFC and I'll give up weight and basically fight you out of a weight class is unreal.
Even though he's a very small part of this story, because he has such knowledge and credibility in the UFC, did you ask Rogan for an interview?
We tried, yeah.
Yeah.
We tried. I never, it was his people, so I've never talked to him directly. But yeah, I would have loved to, because he's actually interviewed Lee Murray. He interviewed him there in the ring. I've never actually interviewed Lee Murray. So yeah, it would have been great to talk to him.
Interesting. What was the most surprising element of this story that you discovered upon creating it?
I think the one that nobody got hurt during the robbery is pretty crazy. I mean, as we're recreating that and going through it and trying to match it as closely as we can, it's shocking that how calm they were, that nobody was panicked. They weren't yelling, screaming at people. So it's very surprising that they didn't do that. And then I didn't understand how good of a fighter Lee was, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
That hearing that from the trainers and the MMA legends that we interviewed, saying that he actually could have been one of the goats of the industry, was very, very surprising.
Do you agree with that?
I mean, I trust their opinion, considering the people that Pat Miletich has trained and been around. And I mean, to hear Anderson Silva say he was afraid to fight Lee when that's crazy. That's crazy for that guy to say that. And when you hear Anderson break down their fight, I mean, that's insane. Lee Murray's last professional fight was Anderson Silva.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy. And went 3 rounds with him, went to a decision. So I think just the fact that he didn't get annihilated by Anderson says something, because Anderson annihilated legends, for years in the UFC.
And this was right on the verge of Anderson really breaking out in the UFC and ultimately becoming one of the all-time greats.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I was very surprised that his skill level was like that. Like Remco, I think, says he was a purple belt level in jiu-jitsu, which was also very surprising. I didn't realize he was that good and that well-rounded as a fighter.
So Lee is in prison now, and I believe is set to stay in prison for at least another 10 to 15 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's scheduled to be released in 2035. There's no early release in Morocco. There's no parole. If you get sentenced to 10 years, 15 years, you serve every bit of that.
Why is he in Morocco and not England, where the crime occurred?
Well, that's another part that really interested me at the beginning of the story that I really kind of got obsessed about, was trying to figure that out. We get into that in Ep4, which is an hour and 20-minute ep. But his case is actually, from a criminal standpoint, it's historic and kind of unprecedented. That he was prosecuted in a country where he didn't commit a crime. That only happens in cases of war criminals and, like sex trafficking cases. That doesn't happen for bank robbery or heist cases, but it happened in this case. And we get into that in great detail.
Not that this is why you're always making a documentary on a potential crime that has been committed, or something that has been done that's been called a crime but isn't. Do you think your documentary may have any impact on a lessening of the sentence for Lee in Morocco?
I don't know. I think it's probably going to have an impact on people's perception of Lee. I think for sure that will happen. But I don't know if that's going to actually lead to any real world changes. Morocco is a very, very different place. We filmed there. for this doc, and it's a very, very different world.
How so?
My understanding, well, from a criminal standpoint, I mean, you could get arrested for seemingly anything, and there's no rights. So they don't have a good human rights record when it comes to the prisons. It's pretty terrible, actually. And we get into a lot of that again in F4. But I think the only thing that could really save Lee and get him out earlier is if the king of Morocco pardons him, which I think they've been trying to do since the moment he was sentenced. So, you know, the story of how he got this crazy sentence is amazing in itself, and there could be a doc made just on that. But I think my position at this point is I just don't know what good come of keeping him in prison longer. He's been in for 17 years under terrible, terrible conditions, and just about I think all but one of the people that played a role in the heist are out now in England.
Since I asked about Tito and Rogan, I guess I have to ask if you submitted a request to speak with the King of Morocco.
No, I didn't. I didn't. No, I don't know what their system, the way that I understand it is you have the government system where the people actually vote for people in certain positions, and the king just doesn't interfere with those. So it's the king over here, and if he steps in, that's the law, right? If he steps in, everybody's going to do what he wants, but he apparently doesn't really get involved very often. Only when it comes to kind of pardons does he really step in. So I'm sure he's aware of that, but I'm sure he's not aware of the details of the story and the crime. So I would be curious if he did see this.
Yeah, I mean, you never know. It could make a difference if somebody wields that much power.
Yeah.
Much as
I mean,
chooses to be a little bit more lenient as a result.
Yeah, I mean, if he wanted him out tomorrow, Lee's out tomorrow. It would be just like that.
It's hard not to sympathize with Lee at least a little bit because of his upbringing. He grew up in a very rough part of what I'm guessing is the London suburbs. I know you described it. It does sound like it's London area, but less glamorous or glorified area in London. It was hard, and it's what hardened him as a human and led to him being not only a badass fighter, but somebody who, if he feels like he's been disrespected, is going to force that other person to pay a price. And while those closest to him swear up and down that he would never hurt women or children, there are obvious examples of him completely pummeling other adult men who disrespect him, either in the ring or in real life. And obviously that road rage incident is a really horrifying example of that. But how much of where Lee is right now is a product of an unfortunate hand that he was dealt versus just really poor decisions that he made as a human?
I think it's more the latter.
Okay.
Because I think there's plenty of people that grew up under similar circumstances. He grew up in essentially what was a project, right, in the south side of England, which is a very, very rough place to grow up. Everybody there, is surrounded by criminals, as they get into in the dock. Normal to see people steal and sell drugs and do all of that stuff. But I think it was the latter. I think it was the decisions that he made. I think, the road rage incident, that is the fork in the road for him. And I don't think that was his fault at all. I think my opinion is he was completely justified in doing that. That story is insane. So it's like there was plenty of times where Lee had run-ins with the law that I'm sure were completely his fault. That one wasn't, but the fact that turned into what it turned into, I think is really, really unfortunate.
Pat, before I let you go, I do have to ask. So you've covered college basketball, Texas high school football, now the UFC. Is that next idea brewing already? And if so, obviously I don't want you to spoil it, but what is the general subject matter?
We have a lot in the works when it comes to the sports world. Not just on one particular subject. There's a lot happening.
All right.
Can't get into too much detail.
Understood. Can't wait to check it out regardless. He is Pat Kondelis, Emmy-winning filmmaker. The new documentary series is called Catching Lightning. It's a 4-part series. Premieres this Sunday on Showtime at 7 p.m. Central. You can actually check it out a little bit earlier on Showtime's streaming platforms this Friday. Pat, thank you as always for the time, man. Really appreciate this latest work, and I can't wait till the next time that we get a chance to speak.
Yeah, thank you so much, Trey. Always a pleasure speaking with you.